Hello everyone, Tyler King here with another episode of NuReview. Today I'm going to be reviewing the 1985 Gary Numan album, The Fury. So The Fury is released in September of 1985. It is the second Gary Numan solo album released on his Numa Records, and it is the first album of his since Warriors to have an outside producer. For this album, he has employed the Wave team to produce the album. As far as returning musicians go, we have the return of Tracy Ackerman and Tessa Niles, both on backing vocals, and my favorite, Dick Morrissey on saxophone. Oh yeah. One of the interesting things about this album is that it follows really what is my favorite of Gary Numan's mid-80s output, which is Berserker. And Berserker had a very angry, industrial, lots of guitar sound, and that is really lacking on The Fury. Now, The Fury does reach number 24 on the UK album charts. This is going to be one of the last albums, I believe, that is going to chart up until his most recent album, 2013 Splinter. So right off the bat, the album opens up with Call Out the Dogs. Call Out the Dogs begins with a sample of the Ridley Scott 1982 film Blade Runner, before turning into a kind of wants to be aggressive and sinister but isn't really synth-funk song. Once he does start singing, though, Gary is kind of poking fun at himself. He refers to himself as an old story during the chorus. It does remind me a little bit of the song I Die, You Die, which was a standalone single before the 1980 Telecon album was released, in that both I Die, You Die and Call Out the Dogs are both lyrically talking about his hatred of the radio stations and the music critics. The main difference being, though, that I Die, You Die was released before one of his best albums, Telecon. Call Out the Dogs opens a very mediocre Gary Numan album, which is made after his star has burnt out. However, that being said, this is probably one of the better songs on the album. And as far as Gary Numan's output from 1985 through the early 1990s, this is going to be one of the better songs released during that period. The next song is This Disease, which opens with another sample before going into full funk mode as Tracy and Tessa continue to chant, "This disease." Gary is making very vague statements like, "I'm out of my class, we must expect such things." But once Tracy and Tessa start going tick, tock, tick, I have lost all fucking interest in this song. And Gary himself is barely on this song. Instead, we're treated to just a bunch of female backing vocals and saxophone solos. And then there's a part, maybe 3/4 into the song, where the instrumentation starts going do-do-do-do-do-do, like it's going to fall apart. And while when it was recorded, it might have been done in a very light-hearted way, it just makes me roll my eyes so hard that the planet shifts on its axis. The next song is Your Fascination, which is another faster up-tempo song, which is ruined by overproduction. The very stadium-feeling drums are very loud, they're very annoying, and they detract from a lot of the instrumentation in the song. Especially, there's these very interesting, cool-sounding keyboards that come under Tracy and Tessa when they sing, "I don't suppose that you ever laughed at me," but I can't really pay attention to it because the drums are just vying for all of the attention in this song. Unfortunately, the song doesn't really go anywhere except for some interesting distant sounding backing vocals. However, it's not as offensive as something like This Disease. Luckily, the fourth song on the album is called Miracles, and it opens with Gary singing I Don't Believe in Miracles. And it instantly draws you in because the emphasis on this song is not on the very loud drums or the female backing vocals or the saxophone. Instead, it's very atmospheric, it's very open feeling, and it's very warm. Now, unfortunately, there is a saxophone solo towards the end of the song. However, like on previous ballads, like A Child with a Ghost, it doesn't feel out of place, and it doesn't really detract from the song. And I would go so far as to say that if there were more songs on this album like Miracles, this could be just as good of an album as Berserker was. The next song is The Pleasure Skin. It opens with this very frantic drum beat. However, it does not dissolve into the synth funk feelings of the first few songs, thankfully. And one of the very interesting things that I pick up listening to this song is this sampled percussion sound. It almost sounds like somebody being hit, like after every beat. It's just like... And another very nice thing about this song is that there is a noticeable lack of female backing vocals. Instead, Gary himself sings the backing vocals on this song, and he does a much better job of it than Tracy or Tessa do. And I kind of wonder what this album could have sounded like if, instead of the female backing vocalists, he had taken those duties on himself. Some of the lyrics are kind of lame, but just the conviction that Gary has when he sings them, it makes up for the fact that, you know, the song is called The Pleasure Skin. Now, unfortunately, the B-side opens with the song Creatures. It has this very ominous opening, which kind of draws me in, and then Tracy and Tessa start moaning all over the place. Gary sings I Need It, the sex skin have it, and it's as bad as it sounds. I mean, I don't ever need to hear Gary Numan singing about sex while female backing vocalists behind him are screaming I need it over and over and over again. I mean, the only interesting part of the song is the chorus, where Gary sings you are the young things fed on garbage and lies, but otherwise this song is best forgotten. The next song is Tricks, not Tracks, not Tracks. That's on the Pleasure Principle. And Tricks opens with some bursts of saxophone, which does not make me wholly optimistic for this song. Gary singing about how he's seen it all, people who have painted bad pictures and written bad poems, and it's just kind of like, alright, start singing something interesting. But the chorus, where Gary very ominously goes, and we all fall down, is actually one of my favorite moments on the entire album. Fortunately, like a song like Your Fascination or Creatures, this song is again best forgotten. Following that, you have God Only Knows, which feels very cold, it feels very open, kind of like Miracles, but God Only Knows actually sounds like it could have been on the Berserker album. And lyrically, God Only Knows is without a doubt the best song on this album. Probably one of my favorite lines in the song. He says, I can tell you what fear is. It's the smell of burning. And I have no idea what the hell that means, but it sounds so cool. I mean, there isn't much change in what's going on instrumentally, but the lyrics and the vocal melody are so good that it doesn't matter. There's kind of a hint at his atheism that he's going to start singing about, starting in the 90s, where he says, I don't believe in God, I don't believe in praying, now I question everything. And late 80s Gary Numan does not get much better than this song. And then finally we have I Still Remember, which is another ballad, and it opens up with saxophone. And I really want to like this song. I really do, but I can't get fully behind it. It feels way too overproduced, and the female backing vocals are just so sappy, they take me out of the emotion I'm supposed to be feeling listening to this song. Gary is singing about the aftermath of a breakup, and while on a song like Love Is Like Clock Law, I was fully invested in what he was singing. On this song, it feels very phoned in. The song actually ends with Gary Numan singing "This Could Be My Last Song," and following the disappointment of this album as a fan in 1985, I might have welcomed that, also knowing what's going to come over the next few albums. And that's the fury. I mean, as far as personal thoughts go, this album is, for me at least, it's a very big disappointment, especially following Berserker. It feels like a big step backwards following that album, more towards something like Warriors. The other thing that this album does not have going for it that something like Berserker, or actually even Warriors, had, is a very distinct lack of live instrumentation. On those albums, you have players like Russell Bell, Chris Payne. I mean, even on I, Assassin, you have Pino Palladino. And on this album, it feels wholly fake and very emotionless. Sure, some of that can be attributed to the producers of the album, the Wave team, but I feel like a lot of it also can be attributed to Gary Numan. I feel like, especially starting with this album, he just kind of starts making the album that he expects people to have him make, and it suffers for it. I mean, granted, this isn't as bad as it's going to get, but this is not a Gary Numan album that I really ever find myself coming back to and listening to it for preparation of this review. This was probably the first time I listened to this album in maybe 2 years. I mean, I really am not big on this album. That being said, though, one thing that this album does have that the next handful of Gary Numan albums don't have is it does have a few good songs that make up for the mediocre or downright bad songs in between. Favorite songs on here, I would have to say, are probably going to be Miracles, Call Out the Dogs, and God Only Knows. His favorite songs are definitely This Disease, The Pleasure Skin, and Creatures. And, I mean, again, at the end of the day, this is an album that I don't really go back to listening to, partly also because it is the first step in a very rapid decline of quality in Gary Numan's music. I mean, I'm probably being really generous with this rating. I guess I'll give it a 5 out of 10. Yeah. So what did you think? Do you love this album? Do you hate this album? Is this your favorite Gary Numan album? Is it your least favorite Gary Numan album? Leave any questions and comments and constructive criticism in the comment box below. Coming up next is going to be a non-Gary Numan review. It's going to be a review that was actually requested to do by a friend. So that's going to be up, and then following that, I'm going to be doing a review of Strange Charm. So until then, this is Tyler King with NuReview, Gary Numan's The Fury. 5 out of 10.